What makes a black sitcom different from a white sitcom? I think the main distinction is that a black sitcom has predominantly black characters and focuses on themes and experiences that are culturally specific to the black community. So that's what makes something like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Martin, Living Single, Blackish, all considered black sitcoms versus sitcoms like Friends and Seinfeld. In very earlier conception of TV shows and sitcoms, they almost always had a entirely white cast. And so that created a need for black sitcoms to introduce any form of diversity into the space. But because of that, it created this kind of segregation in the sitcom space. Black sitcoms were marketed and targeted towards black audiences, while non-black sitcoms or white sitcoms were pretty much for everyone. So I think that kind of created the framework for the one black character quota, where a sitcom, if they want to introduce any form of diversity, will try to limit the amount of people of color or black characters to one. Because one black character is still a sitcom, just a little bit diverse. Two black characters is a really diverse sitcom. Three or more black characters, well, now you just have a black sitcom, and the idea is that that will appeal to much fewer audiences. So I think there was this idea that if you wanted a sitcom to do well and to reach as much people as possible, you had to limit the amount of black characters there were in the show if you were going to have any black characters at all. Because we know that for several decades, there were really, really popular sitcoms that didn't feature any black characters or any other characters of color for that matter. Friends is often said as one of the most egregious examples of this. It is a sitcom set in the 90s in New York, which is a very diverse city, probably one of the most diverse cities in the entire world, but the entire cast is made up of entirely white people. Later on in the seasons, they did try to introduce some black characters. One of the more notable examples is Aisha Tyler's character, who dated Ross for a little bit, but she was one of the only few people of color that was ever on the show, and she only appeared for a couple episodes. Seinfeld is also another big example of a really popular sitcom taking place in a really diverse city that also did not have any people of color on the main cast. There's also Full House, How I Met Your Mother, The Big Bang Theory, That 70s Show. All of these shows never featured any black character in their main cast or even a strong reoccurring black guest star. So even though these shows are really beloved and are really popular and maybe even well written and have great humor, they actually reflect the lack of racial diversity and representation that has been an ongoing issue in Hollywood for decades. Recently, there has been a more concerted effort to introduce diversity in sitcoms and have more diverse characters. And we see that with the introduction of more black characters in a predominantly white cast. But I still can't help but notice that there seems to be a quota on how much diverse characters you can have or how much black characters you can have before it stops just being a sitcom and starts being a black sitcom. Now, that doesn't always mean that the one black character quota means that these characters are always black token characters. I do think that it is possible to have one black character on a main cast and still have them be treated with respect and dignity and given really good plot lines. It doesn't always just mean that they're there just for the sake of being there or filling up a quota or just to tick off a diversity box. There have been more shows with more diverse casts like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Blackish, Insecure, The Good Place that have taken steps to address the diversity issue. So I do want to look at some of these TV shows that have a one black character quota and look at whether or not they were treated with respect and were given the freedom to be as fully fleshed out as their white counterparts, or if they ultimately fell into the black token character trope. So let's look at some of these TV shows and rank them. So I'm going to be looking at these characters in order from most black token character to least black token character. First, we're going to look at Andre Harris from Victorious. I hate to say it, but on the list of characters that I'm going to be looking at in this video, Andre Harris is probably the most black token character. Victorious does have somewhat of a diverse cast. Tori is half Latina. Beck is also a person of color. We have Andre, Robbie is Jewish, so there is kind of a mixing pot of diversity in the cast. However, I think Andre, more so than any other character, probably only second place to Beck, had absolutely nothing to do in the show as the series went on. There isn't much time spent on Andre's character or his background as much as there is spent on other characters. He basically only serves one purpose, and that is to be the guy who creates the songs that Tori sings. Even very early on, he kind of served the role of being Tori's best friend, where he was the one introducing her to this world and explaining all of the eccentricities about being in a performing arts school. He did serve a purpose in that very first season. He was probably the only other quote-unquote normal person at the school that Tori could bounce ideas off. He was there to help her through it. But as the seasons went on and that was no longer necessary, he didn't really have anything to do. He basically became the sidekick to Tori. And even then, he wasn't even an effective sidekick because he wasn't always there. He's only there to assist her in performances and in creating music, or helping her with her personal dilemmas. But very rarely did he ever get his own independent arcs. They were very few and far in between. The only real saving grace for Andre is that he actually was really talented, and they make it a point to note just how talented he was at what he did. So there was some effort to give him an interesting aspect of his character, but personality-wise, we still didn't really get to know a lot about Andre. He was kind of just there in the background most of the time. The next character is Cleveland Brown from Family Guy. I think Cleveland Brown's whole purpose in the show was literally just to be the token black guy. He had little to no character development on the Family Guy show. He was just one of Peter's friends. Whereas Peter's other friends had their backgrounds fully fleshed out, we learned more about Joe and Quagmire, their family, their dynamic, their eccentricities, their quirks. We knew very little to nothing about Cleveland. He only seemed to serve the purpose of being able to make jokes about the black community, and that's it. In most episodes, he's playing a supportive role, he's in the background, but he's never a part of any central narratives.
No, 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 no! Doggone it! That's it! No! No, 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 no! No, 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 no! Oh, God!
Cleveland is kind of the epitome of the black token character, so much so that the only time we ever get any kind of depth into his character was when they had to do an entire spin-off series about him. When they created the Cleveland show as a spin-off of Family Guy, that was when we started to finally get more depth to his character. They fleshed out his background, his storylines, his family, and it really added more complexity, storylines, and personality into his character. But it kind of sucks that it had to take an entire spin-off show to even get that. So in Family Guy, Cleveland exhibited traits of a token black character, just playing a supporting role in a predominantly white cast, without any real depth or focus on his character. However, the Cleveland show did give him much more prominence and developed his role. It moved him beyond tokenism to explore his character and his experiences as a black man even further. But then the Cleveland show got cancelled and he came right back to Family Guy. After the Cleveland show got cancelled, he basically just went back to being the same token black character. He doesn't even appear in a lot of the new episodes, but it was fun while it lasted. Have you ever been personally injured? You may be entitled to financial compensation. Personal injuries could be worth millions of dollars. You could stand to win a large sum of money. But that really all comes down to what kind of legal firm you hire to take on your case. Now, with traditional firms, you may run into many problems like tedious paperwork, high costs, lengthy processing times. That is, of course, unless you hire one of America's leading personal injury firms, Morgan & Morgan. Morgan & Morgan is a personal injury law firm with over 1,000 attorneys operating in all 50 states. If you are ever seriously hurt, your injury may be worth millions of dollars. With Morgan & Morgan, clients have won up to $12 million in Florida and up to $26 million in Philadelphia. Companies often lowball their clients, but Morgan & Morgan always tries to get the very best payout for their clients. And the best part about it is, the service is completely free unless you win your case. To use their service, you can click the link in my bio or scan the QR code, fill out this application and submit it, and that's it. Someone from the firm will reach out to you regarding your case. So if you ever get seriously injured, your case could be worth millions and you're only a few clicks away from potentially changing your life. You can start your claim with Morgan & Morgan at www.forthepeople.com/Tron or by scanning the QR code on the screen. Next is Mercedes Jones from Glee. Mercedes Jones is kind of the quintessential black token character. Throughout Glee, Mercedes is portrayed as being a very talented singer, but she's often neglected, forgotten, and relegated to the background and given less character development and main story plot lines compared to some of her white peers. She does get some opportunities to step into the spotlights, especially in the later seasons, which is why she's a little bit higher on this list. And to be honest, I think the issue with Mercedes is less that she is just the black token character, which you could make the argument that she is, but rather that Glee had so many characters and the writers often forgot about a lot of them unless they were Rachel or Kurt. Like, there are some other white characters in the cast who seldomly got any main storylines either. And this wasn't just an issue for the black characters, the Asian characters also had an issue with this where they got barely anything to do. So maybe it was less black tokenism and more so that they just couldn't be bothered to create storylines for many of the other characters. For much of Glee, Mercedes often plays a secondary role compared to characters like Rachel, Finn, Kurt. Rachel often gets a lot of solos and story arcs focusing on her dreams and her challenges, but Mercedes is often in the background, despite the fact that she's one of the most talented characters in the show. Mercedes is also often used as comedic effect. Sometimes she falls into some black woman stereotypes. She's a diva, she has attitude, she's assertive, and sometimes that leads into the sassy black woman or angry black woman trope. But probably the biggest example of how underutilized Mercedes was the fact that she was arguably one of the best vocalists in the show, but she doesn't always receive the same opportunities for solos or focus on her musical aspirations like the other characters. However, as the show went on, Mercedes did get some significant development. She did get more storylines about wanting to be more respected in the club.
Everyone knows that Rachel is your favorite.
That's not
true. You give that skinny Geronimo wearing ass kisser everything. And for 2 years, I took it. But not anymore. I'm done.
There was that storyline where she even left the club and she was more of a focused antagonist or competition for the Glee Club. That was a fun time. She did get a lot more focus, especially in season 3, where she focused on pursuing her own dreams of becoming a recording artist and breaking out of Rachel's shadow. And then that got some more development down the road, even if it did take a while. So while Mercedes does exhibit some signs of tokenism very early on, her character does develop over time and she does get more opportunities to pursue her own dreams and goals. However, there was just a general lack of focus when it came to her character that made it seem that the writers didn't particularly care about her at all. Bonnie Bennett from The Vampire Diaries is another character that is often frequently discussed as a character who fully embodies the elements of black tokenism. Despite the fact that Bonnie is one of the main characters in the series, she's often relegated to the background and very seldomly given main story points. It's an interesting dynamic because Bonnie in the series plays a very powerful witch and is a very close friend to the main protagonist, Elena. And so sometimes her positioning as Elena's best friend and a powerful witch does mean that she has some integral function in certain plot points. But she's only ever used as a plot device. She's the one who defeats the big bad guy, who creates the spell, who saves the day, but we very rarely do any deep development into her character or spend enough time on situations focused on her. Despite the fact that Bonnie is a main character, her personal life is pretty underdeveloped in comparison to the other characters such as Elena, Stefan, and Damon. Those characters get really extensive backgrounds. We learn so much about them and their forefathers and their families. They have lots of romantic arcs, which is one of the main components of Vampire Diaries, the characters hooking up with each other. We get developments on their family issues, lots of really big emotional developments. But with Bonnie, it pretty much all just comes down to her being a witch and her sacrificing herself for the others. Nothing really on her personal growth or relationships with anyone. One of the main criticisms of Bonnie as a character is the fact that she's often put in a position to be the sacrificial lamb. Bonnie as a character is often criticized as existing primarily to either support or save the main white protagonist. Throughout Vampire Diaries, Bonnie repeatedly sacrifices herself or her powers for the benefit of her friends, oftentimes getting nothing in return.
No! I can do this! I can do this!
only further reinforcing the idea that her role as a member of the show is only to serve and further the development of the main white characters. Bonnie, unlike the other main characters, also has little to no big romantic arcs. Elena has her relationship with Stefan and Damon. Caroline has her relationship with Stefan and Tyler, but Bonnie's romantic life is often not addressed or just thrown to the side. In the very few occasions where she does have a romantic relationship, they don't receive the same level of depth or care or even on-screen time in comparison to the other main white characters' relationships. It's also teased throughout the show that Bonnie also has a very rich family history. Her bloodline is considered one of the most powerful bloodline of witches of all time, but we never really spend time with that. We don't really spend a lot of time learning about Bonnie's family, her relationship to her family. There are so many interesting aspects of Bonnie's character that is just never fully interrogated. And it's particularly frustrating when it comes to someone like Bonnie because she's oftentimes a crucial character when supernatural events transpire. She's one of the most powerful witches in this universe, but she ends up just feeling very disposable to the plot because they only bring her out to stop the big bad, and then there's nothing left for her to do. There were some interesting aspects of character growth. We got to see her at her most powerful in some seasons, and then in other seasons, she's not even really a witch. And then in other seasons, she's a witch in everything but the name. She can barely do any magic and has absolutely nothing to do. So she's truly whatever the plot needs her to be in service of the other white characters. But despite all of that, I do think that a lot of people still really like Bonnie, because as opposed to other token black characters who fill the one black character quota, she at the very least is crucial to a lot of big storylines, if only just as a magical plot device. So many storylines only get resolved because of her. It's very surface level and there's not a lot of depth or care put into how to use Bonnie, but she's there. So while Bonnie is a vital character in the series, her treatment throughout the series does leave less to be desired. It's really frustrating that she's often relegated to the role of a sacrificial savior, and the fact that they spend no time developing or exploring her character. Winston from New Girl. So for me, Winston from New Girl very early on felt like a stereotypical token black character. His whole presence in the show really did seem like it was there just to fit a quota, because the only other black character that was initially a part of the show, Coach, had to leave the series. So it really did just feel like, well, we do need another black guy, let's get someone to replace him. So very early on, Winston's character felt somewhat underdeveloped and undercooked in comparison to the other roommate. I felt like the other roommate, Nick, Jess, and Schmidt, very early on had very clearly defined roles. Like, you knew exactly who they are, you knew how they were going to play against each other, you knew from the very beginning that there was some romantic tension there, but it was kind of hard to figure out what Winston's role in the show was going to be. He just felt very underdeveloped, and that his only reason for being there was to round out the cast by having a black man. So in the earlier episodes of the show, he's often just in the background offering comedic relief, but is never really a strong focus in the beginning of the show. However, as time went on, he did get some character development. He becomes a lot more interesting of a character. He gains some really interesting qualities like being this huge lover for pranks. There's more exploration into his friendships and romantic relationships. That by the end of the show, Winston almost feels like a different character to the one at the beginning of the show, and he feels more well-rounded. Winston ended up becoming one of my favorite characters from the show. He had a lot of really good moments. He's really funny, really charismatic. I love that they did try to flesh out his relationship, his romantic relationships as well, and that he just got all of these really interesting quirks like being really into pranks and cats. He also gained a new purpose, being the emotional core of the friendship group, the one that everybody could come to. So even though he started off as almost a token character, by the end I felt like he really earned his spot. Now, the one character on this list who I feel like never really felt like a token character was Troy Barnes from Community. He's one of just 2 black characters on the main cast, and very early on, it seems like each of the characters were just there to play a specific stereotype. And he was supposed to be the dumb jock, while Shirley was supposed to be the middle-aged Christian black woman. But I was really taken aback that very early on, Troy's character kind of subverted that trope of the dumb jock. He has multiple storylines that focus on his own personal growth, his relationships, his friendships. That at no point he ever felt just like the token black guy or the sidekick friend. He seems very dynamic, and his friendship with Abed really makes the series. The community cast is already pretty well diverse, so I like that Troy was also given his own space to shine. And it's very similar to the characters in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, where it's also a diverse cast, and all the characters, even the black characters, do get to be really developed and fleshed from even the very beginning. So that's it. Those are some of the black characters who appear in a predominantly white cast who may or may not fall into black tokenism. I do think that it is important to have a diverse cast and have characters of color on your cast. But I don't think it makes sense to introduce a black character to the cast if you're not really interested in writing a black character, if you're not going to give them anything to do, or if you're not interested in developing their character or give them compelling storylines. In that case, I feel like you might as well just be a Friends or Seinfeld where you just write the characters that you do want to write. Because it's not really helpful to have a black main character on the cast and they be treated in a very different way than all the other white characters. That's why black sitcoms were so important, because here we had not only a predominantly black cast, but all the characters getting really compelling storylines and not being treated as just the token black friend. So let me know what your thoughts are about this below. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one.